from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with the 31 days of gangster films and police films from the year 1970 to the present day. And I admit that this might be seen to be a wide expanse of years. I understand that, but it is my hope at the same time that this can afford us, you and me, with the opportunity to be able to speak about as many films as possible in the context of these really absorbing and invigorating and provocative and thought-provoking genres of cinema over the course of these 31 days. So those genres being the gangster film genre and the police film genre, respectively. For purposes of today, and specifically this video, I'd like to focus in on a work that I'd like to talk about in the context of the police film genre, because it is a film that has as its main character, indeed the title of the film, which I'll talk about, is an officer of the law in New York City, again set in contemporary times. This character, however, and the things and situations and scenarios and episodes that we encounter as viewers as we watch this film involving this main character, these have the potential to challenge to the very core, to shock and to repulse and to disgust. And this film, as a result of those depictions, has been described or has been sometimes regarded in some circles as being very controversial, very disgusting, very gross, and very intense indeed. But at the same time, even though those types of, say, viewpoints might exist in the context of cinema criticism and cinema reviews with this film at its subject matter, at the same time, those points are indeed there. And those points are also there and are also, I would suggest, meant to support and fuel and provide a background or context against which, or the backdrop against which, this main character is attempting to, or we see him trying to do something in the context or in the name of what might be called salvation. Salvation of the heart, salvation of the mind, salvation of the soul. And when we consider that context and we see the very depths of despair that he finds himself, and oftentimes, yes, perhaps those depths of despair are of his own doing and of his own making, that's for sure. Even though we do see that, and even though we as viewers might not necessarily sympathize with him, and in fact we as viewers might strongly object to what it is we see in his behavior, and we might be even morally disgusted and repulsed by what it is we are witnessing, and what it is that further suggests about him as a human being to us and to our eyes as viewers of this film. All the same, or because of those depths, we find that this film and the story of possible salvation and what that means and whether it is even attainable or achievable or not in real terms manifest in the real gritty physical nature of the environment of the film, New York City as we see it in this film. Whether it is indeed possible, that becomes the struggle, that becomes thus the journey and indeed the story and the very essence of this work, which makes it incredibly powerful, incredibly challenging, and yes, incredibly thought-provoking, indeed, provocative. Yes, this film is. I'm speaking of a work that is described as being from 1992, and the screenplay is credited to Zoe Lund and Abel Ferrara, and it's directed by Abel Ferrara, and it is the 1992 work starring the one, the only, Harvey Keitel. It is this film. Bad Lieutenant. Bad Lieutenant, with Harvey Keitel as, or described as, or referred to as the Lieutenant. It's in the title, Bad Lieutenant. I mean, he is a cop character that could be described as corrupt. We see him doing things that are not just beyond the law, but that are breaking the law. We see things that are very dangerous to his own person, and also to the lives and safety of others around him. And he commits crimes as well, and they are oftentimes, maybe there might be seen in the eyes of the law to be petty crimes, or they might be incredibly serious crimes indeed. That, as I say, injure or have the potential to injure not just those around him, but also himself in the process. And so this is a series of vignettes or scenes or exchanges where we are witness to a very despicable character indeed, the lieutenant. It's in the title, the Bad Lieutenant. Morally corrupt, also corrupt as a police officer, going beyond or taking advantage of his position of law enforcement authority in order to achieve his own personal gains and to achieve his own, say, to satisfy his needs to scratch those itches, however maybe morally repulsive those itches may be, and however disgusting we as viewers might potentially view that act of scratching those itches might seem in these various scenarios that are taking place. This is the presentation of this character who is still within the context of law enforcement, and he's taking this position. And in that way too, we also see him in action professionally, trying to still do his duty, or at least have the semblance of doing his duty. We see certain scenes of him on crime scenes, trying to do initial investigations and the like. We have a sense perhaps that this is all for show, or maybe we have a sense perhaps that all this is maybe as a ruse or a way by which he can further his own personal greed and use his position as a police officer to, say, abscond with potential evidence. There's a subplot involving drugs and illegal and illicit substances, and we see him and his reaction to these various scenarios or exchanges involving this particular component. And so this becomes a very disturbing set of circumstances indeed. And that is, perhaps in a manner of speaking, only scratching the surface, because there are many facets to this character, the lieutenant, Harvey Keitel's lieutenant, that are incredibly shocking. Incredibly shocking. So, but just because the character might be said to be shocking does not mean that the film itself is sort of morally repugnant, because what the film is doing is it is showing the world with this type of character in it, front and center, but it is also showing the how this character is trying to respond to external things that happen, and how those external things, or his responses or reactions to such external things, perhaps leads to the possibility of maybe not necessarily transformation, maybe not necessarily a total transformation into moral righteousness per se, but there is the hope, however faint it might seem, especially given the bleak and dire circumstances, not just of his own soul and character, but also of the world around him, arguably speaking. Because we are dealing with the external factor of, as part of the plot, how he is responding to a incredibly, as a maybe separate matter that he as a police officer is trying to investigate, or as part of the investigation in a certain capacity anyway. There is a crime that is committed. It's a terrible, horrible crime that's committed involving a very innocent victim in a church. And so we see this morally repugnant character trying to deal with an externality, a crime that is so horrible and so demeaning and so cruel and so shocking. And again, that's something that is outside of his own existence. But he, as a human being, we see him react to this, respond to this, question this, inquire about this, even from a distance, based on his person. He is making inquiries, and those inquiries are on a maybe plot surface level. Maybe they are to a certain degree related to his work as a police officer. But we also understand as we watch the film that these inquiries too are also embedded so fundamentally in his own soul, and the idea of possibility or impossibility, whatever the case may be, of salvation. No matter how morally repugnant one is, no matter how disgusting and immoral a human being might be said to be, even if that person believes it himself or herself, what are the possibilities? What are the ways by which some kind of salvation, however faint, however ephemeral, however limited it might end up being, what can this possibility still do? How can this possibility still present itself in this world, if at all? This is the core of this film. This is the core soul of this film. And this is the reason why this film is so powerful, and it is such a landmark, and it is a film that makes bold and yes, invigorating and exciting statements that are dealing with, as I say, amoral or immoral actors or players or components within its structure. But using that as its structure, it is trying to tell the story of salvation, the possibility or impossibility of salvation given the circumstances. And we're talking about it in say, terms that are very much emotional, personal, individual. They are also of a religious nature, because there is the backdrop of the church, Catholicism, and religion writ large that is on display, and that is due to filmmaking and also the some of the shots that are suggestive of this, as well as the character himself. This is therefore that story of the road to salvation, if it is indeed a road that is not only worth taking, but can be taken at all. Or maybe it's a road that is totally shut off to anyone of the type of moral or immoral fiber that the bad lieutenant of the film might seem to be to our eyes. And so this also means, too, that there is a deeply personal examination of this character, trying to sift through the madness, trying to sift through the chaos, trying to sift through the repulsion, trying, therefore, maybe even desperately, maybe even without hope, trying still, ultimately, all the same, trying to find some kind of semblance of humanity. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that if we are able to discover or witness a sense of humanity within the character of this film, that doesn't necessarily mean that, well, it does lead to a great many questions, too, about how, therefore, we must grapple with those seemingly disgusting and terrible acts that we have seen him commit. How do we reconcile those emotions? Are they indeed irreconcilable? Or in fact, is there a way of reconciliation in a way that is still consistent with this idea of salvation and self-discovery of humanity, and indeed a type of maybe a transformation of the soul and spirit and individual and outlook and philosophy, even when the externalities and maybe even whether other parts of the internal soul process might tend to other directions. So this idea of reconciliation, whether that is indeed possible or not, this is also one of the bold questions of this film. And it also, I think, leads to various possibilities. And it also leads one to question, it leads me to question myself every time I see it, how it is I feel, and how it is I respond and react. And when I go along with the film, as I go from point to point to point, as things develop and become even more intense, I mean, they are intense to begin with, but they become even more and more intense, I begin to grapple with this and struggle with this concept of reconciliation. And I think to myself, am I thinking about this in terms of can I view this and still maintain my sense of my viewership of this particular character as I've seen him all the way up to this film? Or does that mean that my outlook has changed? Or maybe my outlook hasn't changed, but I see a separate dimension that can also coexist with other facets of his character that are arguably quite repugnant indeed. What are the implications of this? And I mean this maybe in a possible, say, context of religious discussion, but perhaps also I mean this as my own personal viewership in the context of maybe a witnessing to a character that is showing us every facet of his being, warts and all, weaknesses and all, bad points and all. And in that way, there is a challenge and a provocation that is occurring that the film has towards me, the viewer. But I also appreciate that very much. I appreciate that provocation. I appreciate that willingness to show all, and in the context, what therefore salvation truly means for a character like this, and what it means to have salvation. What are the deep-rooted consequences of that? And the idea of salvation also is rooted in where one starts prior to salvation. Now, that is also a very key component. It is not wholly existent in a vacuum. It is relative. Things are relative. And in order to understand, in order for me as a viewer, with my own limited, very, very limited understanding of humanity and the universe, in order for me to understand that, I need a film like this to remind me about what the depths are, or what the potential depths are, or examples of what the depths are, in order for me to be engaged in a film that is, I understand, for me, a film about salvation of the heart, the mind, and the soul, with this character at its very center. And for me, therefore, this film is so, so captivating and so powerful, and so leaves me stunned. Every time I see it, I am stunned to silence. I'm sitting there, not knowing what to think. It is that awe-inspiring where it goes, and it goes so many places. And I mentioned too the depths and depths of the lows, but there are also potential the highs of salvation that are manifest in these almost mundane things. But even these mundane things have such deep, deep meaning, such truth in that understanding of that meaning goes so far in the power and reach and the overall complex and overwhelming effect that this film Bad Lieutenant has upon me. This is a work that is incredible. It is difficult. It is, yes, maybe for some, maybe for many, quite controversial, maybe even too controversial. It is certainly a film that is not for everyone, that is for sure. But for me, it makes me realize, this is something where we are witnessing, as I say, a story about salvation with this character, Harvey Keitel's lieutenant, front and center for all to see. What a performance this is. I mean, Harvey Keitel's performance it's brave. It's going in places that are stunning in terms of how far he's willing to go. But this is also to the point of he's showing all. He is showing everything about this character, everything thoroughly. And it's the idea too that there is no perfect person in the world, and to show imperfections, I think, is an act of bravery in terms of acting performance, and to show these deep imperfections of this character in this very brutal and yet, yes, stark and honest way, I think is also a sort of a leap of faith in many senses of that term. And we see, therefore, Harvey Keitel, I think, engaging with, in terms of his work with Ferrara here and others, engaging with this leap of faith. I mean, this work in the hands of Ferrara and company it's one of those stunning works of the 90s for me. And it remains that way for me to this very day. It is this film from 1992, which is Bad Lieutenant. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.